Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Elisabeth of the horse Hombredon. Hombredon we've seen a couple of times before with Elisabeth's husband Thomas riding him and doing a great job, and that seems to be continuing here with Elisabeth's work now. It's very interesting to look at this horse now because he's really begun to go through a real body change, and that's the biggest thing that I notice here. Now, the only thing I would say about the lunging here, Elisabeth was asking if she wants to be sure that she's on track, and of course that's why we're here with this service, so people can do that and get a quick check of how things are going. So what we see here, the only thing wrong here is I would just like to see you asking for a little more trot out of the horse. I'd like to see you just sending him on just a little more actively. So what I feel is you're just a little behind his optimal trot, so to speak. But, you know, once again, this is all good. Now you can just ask him to be a little more active until you see that round movement in the hock. So when the horse gets over its back, the hock will make a very round circle. Like if you put a dot in the middle of it, it will look like it's going around and round. And right now he's falling out a little bit behind because you're just simply not asking him to move forward enough. Which brings up, very often people will say, you know, the usual criticism of the kind of riding that we do here, if people don't understand how horses develop, is they look at the horse and say he's on the forehand. Of course, these are the same people that look at these hollow-backed horses with their legs lifting up, and they think, you know, they think that's lightness. They think that's not on the forehand, but in fact, it totally is. Once again, we must remember that if a horse isn't over its back, it's not lifting its back, it's always on the forehand, no matter how high it lifts its knees. So people have gotten this idea that horses' heads have to be up in the air or they're on the forehand. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, we do see in America, and some people have a bad impression from that. There's a lot of Western riders. It sort of became a style, what we call it peanut rolling, where the horse's nose are on the ground, but the horses are barely moving, you know, and that's the difference. Now, if those same horses, they have them stretching pretty nicely, if they just send them on a little bit more, they would develop. But since they don't, once again, just getting the horse's neck to go down is not going to make the horse develop. We have to, once it gets down, that's the position that facilitates the horse being able to thrust up into the back as best it can for its level of development. So what's happened here is we see how this horse is really elongated. If you look behind the saddle now, I mean, there's just a really sense of the whole top line of this horse going from the pole all the way back to the dock of the tail. You know, I really get a sense that the horse is now developing over the whole top line. And what will happen, once again, in that first 2-year period of work, and I can see that beginning to happen with this horse now, is the withers begin to stretch up through the shoulders. And then the horse gets a much more uphill appearance. If you see a horse that's been correctly developed and you see it standing in the cross ties, you know, it has that look of being uphill just because it's standing in the cross ties. You know, it hasn't even engaged yet because it has developed that kind of level of musculature that it can hold itself in that posture all the time. In other words, that just becomes normal. And that's exactly what people want to do as well when we work out. I mean, think about, you know, how you work out your own body and what you have to go through. And think about the idea of yoga, for instance, is correcting our posture. So that's what our muscles do. They should help us to maintain our posture. And when riding, that's when I talk about strength. I'm talking about the strength of your body to hold it in the right position rather than the strength that we use against the horse, which we never use strength against the horse. Now, Elisabeth's position here looks quite good, with the one exception, and I sort of saw Thomas doing the same thing in his last video. You're both tipping a little bit forward at times, and your legs are getting almost a little bit too far back behind you, which I didn't see in Thomas's previous video. So the one thing I wonder about that, which I mentioned to him, was perhaps you guys want to check your saddles that they're not getting too low in front. And of course, remember, all of you, that if you're doing the work that we're doing here, your horse's backs are going to change, and sometimes quite dramatically, and certainly going to change dramatically over a year or 2-year period of time. So just know that you need to keep having your saddles refit or have a system by which you can block the saddle. There's some good things called thin line pads that allow you to shim your saddles, and that's really what I suggest that you get. That's what we do all the time, and you can put the shins in the front or back, and they come in various widths. You know, so that you can get a pretty decent fit out of a saddle by using them as if your saddle has become low in front. So that's what I'm suggesting that you do, is take a look at that, because I hadn't seen this tipping before. So just think about that a little bit. And getting back to the lunging we saw before, I just want you to try to send the horse on a little bit more in that lunge, and he'll start to thrust up through his back a little more. So keep watching the hocks and trying to get a round circle out of them till you see that power off the ground is beginning to thrust up into the back. But other than that, this is really good. And the horse, once again, is developing really lovely. As I said in our previous video with him, he kind of had that cresty, kind of false cresty look And he's lost all of that. He's really lost all the sort of fatty deposits on his body, and now he looks much more athletic. But we can see even this horse, you know, when we see him in his correct posture, which is right there, his neck doesn't come straight up out of the shoulders. So this is what we have to understand with each horse, that the level of the head and neck is relative to the horse's conformation, but that doesn't mean that it can't lower behind. It just means that its head and neck is going to be in a little different position when it does. We have to get out of this idea that so many dressage people have, that, you know, that they have to have this neck way up in the air, and that's what leads to so many horses being broken at the third vertebrae, because they're trying to force the horse's body into a frame that's just not natural for it and would never be natural for it, even if it were well developed. So keeping those things in mind as we develop. But here we can really see how the top line of this horse has really elongated out to the pole. It's really nice. Once again, in the walk here, I'd like to see just a little bit more active walk. But we get to a really good place once we get to the trot work. And you got it a little more active there, and that's good. So at least like that. We want the walk to feel a bit like a march. And then we don't lose that rhythm. It's, again, in all of our riding, we would like to have that feeling that we could set a metronome to what we're doing, you know. Or let's say that an orchestra could use your horse as a metronome, watching its legs. And also remember that when we talk about the horse being in rhythm, we're talking about the two ends of the horse being in rhythm with one another. For instance, when you see a horse that throws its shoulders way out and does these, you know, almost Spanish trot-looking lengthenings of stride, which is really what it is, we see how the front and back end become disconnected. In other words, they don't swing on the same plane. So once again, remember that when we talk about rhythm, it's not the rate of speed we go around the ring, it's the rhythm between the two ends of the horse. In other words, which have to be like dancers. And think about it, if you are a dancer and your partner gets out of rhythm, what it feels like, well, that's what happens to a horse. You know, it's partnering with itself, its front end and its back end. And if one gets out of sync with the other, it's going to do a great deal of damage and be very uncomfortable for the horse. But what we're seeing here is really nice, really good rhythm in this walk. Once again, you could just work for just a little bit more activity is about the only thing I would say that I would like to see improved. Like there, see how he slowed down a little bit. So I'd like to see a little generally just a little more activity in the walk throughout. And then of course we must maintain the rhythm. Always remembering that the rhythm is what guides us and lets us know whether or not the work we are doing is having a good gymnastic effect for the horse. Because if the horse loses rhythm, it means we're losing the gymnastic quality of the exercise. That is the muscle building aspect of the exercise, because the horse is evading doing the work. So that's why it's so important that we work a horse at whatever pace that is that allows them to be in good rhythm. Once again, rhythm between the front and back end. But I love how this horse has developed across the back there. I mean, he's almost completely flat there. And once again, how long the horse now looks like a big ball rolling over the ground. So that turn back there just got a little bit slow. So I think that's generally the thing that you need to work on here, is just getting just a little bit more out of the horse. You're getting good work, but just not quite the optimal work at all times. So keep working for that just by developing a little more rhythm. But this is all beautiful work. The horse is developing wonderfully. You see how we're starting to see the top line in the horse. Now good transition into the trot there, and exactly what you want to do. Always remember when we're making these transitions in the beginning that we can't expect a horse to make a great transition between the gaits until it's really solidly in the aids in each one of those gaits. And then what we find is that the problems with transitions just disappear. Now I'd say the same thing here. I would just like to see you sending the horse on a little bit more, but you do that as you go on here. He starts to swing better. Looking at you again, once again, it looks to me like your legs are coming too far back. Now that's a number of things that can cause that. You could be pinching with your knees, which is something that you don't want to do. But you're just getting your leg a little too far behind you right there, because actually if something went wrong, you would have a hard time staying in the saddle and not going out over the horse's head. So we want our legs to be underneath us. Yes, the outside leg comes back from the hip, always remember, not from the knee. But at all times we want to keep feeling like we're lifting our toe up when we're riding. So it's okay to bring the heel in and give a little upwards touch. As Nuno talks about in his book, he talks about plucking underneath the horse, like plucking a guitar string to make the back vibrate underneath you. And if any of you ever watch horse chiropractors, the good ones, they'll get underneath the horse with their fingers and they find the spots and they'll get the horse to lift its back. Well, that's exactly what we're doing when we're riding. So, you know, you can actually self-chiropractor your horse into the correct position, which is essentially what all this work is based on. Now, I do use chiropractors when I need them. If I have a horse that, you know, has a problem that isn't working out for itself, and I certainly think they get there faster. You know, I think most problems will work their way out on their own once we start, that is bridle lameness, that is irregularities in the gaits that are just caused by the posture of the horse. Really nice swing here, though. Now we're starting to get to the speed that we want. Way down there. But once again, I just get a little feeling that you're tipping forward a little bit. So once again, that can either be pinching with your knees, or that can be that your saddle is too low in front. But really good trot we're getting out of the horse here. Now it's still a little flat at this stage. From here it's going to start developing and start developing more thrust. Now watch as the head went all the way down there. Watch the back end, if you need to back up to watch that. And see how just for that moment that he went all the way down, even like here, there's a much rounder circle in the hock. Once again, if you put a white dot in the middle of the hock, when the horse is in a good working gait, usually that hock will make almost a perfect round circle with most horses. So if we see that that circle becomes elliptical, that is, it goes up and down in an oval up and down, that tells us the horse isn't reaching through enough. And therefore would not be in rhythm. But this is all really good work. I love how this horse is developing. He looks much more like an athlete. You look how trim he looked. We can clearly see now as he's gone on here, as his abdominal wall has pulled up along with his back. Always remembering it's not, you know, the two work together, just like with a person. I believe firmly that everybody should study yoga and Pilates a little bit and get the idea of how our own bodies work, and that will help you a great deal to understand what a horse goes through. I think every rider has to have a commitment to their own personal fitness and staying in peak condition themselves without killing themselves. And that's the difference, and that's how we want horses. You know, we're not training to do something that's so extreme like something like a marathon. And if you ever have known people that do these long distance horse ride things, you know, endurance trail riding, you know, they're kind of very much like the people who run marathons. They don't run a marathon every day, but when they do, even the best of the people can't walk for a couple of days afterwards. So, you know, that's kind of what extreme things do to horses, and we don't want to do that. We want to just keep every work very healthful. Look how beautifully he's rolling over the ground right there. Now that's wonderful. Right there is absolutely perfect. So from here, once you can keep this active trot, all you do is just bring the pole up, always remembering that we're not shortening the neck back, we're just letting the pole come up. And that's the biggest misconception that we see in dressage today, is most people are pulling the necks back up and back to them, thinking that that's collection, when all that really does is shorten the stride. Once again, a lot of people today get by, you know, we've bred horses today that are such fabulous movers that they have so much movement, I think that they just mask the fact of what's really going on to people who don't have enough education to see what's going on. In other words, they see all these legs going in all these different directions. But once again, you always have to ask yourself when you see these upper level horses like that, are they in rhythm? Are the two ends in rhythm with one another? But this horse has both ends in rhythm right now. That's really nicely swinging. And once again, you know, we're riding in an outdoor arena here, you know, with not the $1 million footing. It looks like just sand, and it's not all that perfectly level. But once again, that's why it's so important to get horses working over their backs. It's only been in recent years that, you know, people think that horses have to have these $1 million arenas to ride in or they're going to fall apart. And of course today it does help because that's how people are riding horses, so at least having that kind of footing. Because if those horses that are not over their back step in a hole, they're going to fall down. That's why you don't see people out fox hunting on Tennessee walkers and saddlebreds. And actually, I have to tell you that I did see that one time. Some people showed up at an opening hunt on Tennessee walkers, and it was one of the most amusing things I've ever seen, but sad at the same time. Really nice lengthening right there. So this is all just developing absolutely beautifully with this horse. Like how you sit there, notice there was no change in the rhythm. That's exactly what you want to do. You practice sitting trot from the stretch. When you can sit to the trot in the stretch and the horse can keep its back up, then you can begin to bring the pole up in the sitting trot. But you always want to start sitting to a trot for short periods of time, completely down in the stretch. Unfortunately, there are very few people that actually have school horses anymore that are actually school horses, that is, horses that are correctly trained enough that you could actually learn something from them, or that you could take a lunge line lesson. So when we don't have these kind of horses to teach people on and give them, lessons without stirrups as they used to do for a long time, we simply have to find another system to work, and this is the system that does it. So we're training horses and riders together. So we only sit for very short periods of time, only that amount of time that we can maintain our position and that we can maintain the horse over its back. So we start with 1 or 2 strides, then 3 strides, 5 strides, 7 strides. I even start with just changing the diagonal. So you're just sitting 1 bounce. So when you can sit 1 bounce, then you can do 2, then you can do 3, and on and on and on until you can actually sit all the way around a circle, and then of course all the way around the ring, and you can maintain the horse in the rhythm. So you're going about this in exactly the right way. Really beautiful stretch here, and now once again you really could get a good glimpse of his abdominal wall there as we came around that corner, and how that's really engaging. So this horse, to me, he looks like he's 2 feet longer than he looked like in the original videos. Really nice trot right there, really swinging through. Absolutely beautiful. Once again, the only thing I see here is that I think that's part of why you're getting a little tipsy with your hands there, is that you just look like you're ending up with your legs too far behind you at times and not able to stay upright in the saddle. Now you will see that, in the German textbooks they talk about going forward and leaning forward to relieve the horse's back. Now you can do that, but only if you have a very short stirrup, and that's what they forgot to say in there. If you have a long dressage length stirrup and you lean forward, you're going to push all the way down to the forehand, so it doesn't work that way. But you can go into like a 2-point position if you want to, but only if you have a very short stirrup. So this has been a very good workout today, Elisabeth. This horse is coming along absolutely beautifully. The next stage is, once you get that, is just begin to play with the idea of bringing his pole up and seeing how high you can bring it without changing the gait. In other words, finding his true working trot. Great job. Look forward to seeing you next time, and soon. This is Will Faerber.